Hi everyone! In this video we will look at keyshot and how to get started. But first before we do that, we will look into our Rhino document. And as we can see, we have a 3D model. We have the different layers being in, or sort of the different parts of this object being put into different layers. So let's see, we have the glass screen. We have the actual screen in behind, so we could put an image on that. We have a small distance in between. We have a couple of buttons. We have some rubber parts, and we have the main body. So let's go into keyshot. So this is keyshot version 8.1. And the first thing that we will do is to import our file. So I will just use my regular drag and drop. So I will put it into this window. So now I'm using the 3D M file straight from Rhino. When it comes to location, I will keep the original location. That means that it will be positioned sort of accordingly to how it's positioned in my Rhino document. So that means that half of our object will actually be beyond sort of the 0 point, or the construction plane. My up orientation is Z. That's also in relation to how it's placed in Rhino. So we can see here in this axis that we have Z being up. In other softwares like Solid, we actually have Y being in the up direction. So Z, and then we can say import NURBS data. That means that we will have the highest quality possible for our surfaces, so it's updating. So import. So as we can see, we now have our model here, and we can see that we have a little bit of a shadowing happening here in the sort of center plane, and that's due to our position in Rhino. What we can do, and we could have done that already in the import settings, but I want to show you. So we can select the geometry, we have the scene tab, and we can click snap to ground. That will sort of move all the contents above the ground plane, so it looks nice. I can scroll out and pan, so now I'm holding the middle button down. I can turn around by holding the left button, like that. So let's continue with the image size. First, we want to know that we're working sort of in a window that makes sense for us. So I will go to my project window here and click image, and here I will set my the size of my image, and this is actually the size of the window. So now when I click 1920 times 1080, we can see that this is the actual resolution that we're seeing right now in our window. So if I decrease this, or if I unload it from the window, if I'm scaling this window, you will see that these sort of numbers updates, and that's due to sort of these are the pixels that we can actually see in this window right now. But it's good to have the right proportions. So I will make this maximized, and then I will select the size of my sort of output that I want to have, and that means that I will get the right proportions within this window. If I would go to Photoshop quickly and say new document, and I would pick my print like A4 300 dpi landscape, create that document. If I would go for image size, I can actually see how many pixels we have. So an A4 with a really good resolution, perhaps too big, we will have 3000 plus pixels in the width and 2500 about in the height. So that's sort of the numbers we need in order to have like a big printed image. So when doing our renders, we want to pick something that makes sense, so we have enough pixels with the. Now when showing something on screen, I think 1920 times 1080, it's a good like HD resolution that works really well. But of course, depending on what we're going to do with it, we might need more pixels as well. But I will go for this right now. Then when we're actually making the renders, we will click this button, and here we get to pick how many pixels we want to actually sort of export our image in. So we can actually select something else here, but now we know that the window that we're seeing will be sort of the same as the output. But more on that at a later point. So let's continue dragging some materials. We have the library on the left side and sort of the project and the settings on the right side. So let's start with some materials. I can drag it into my window and release it straight on the object. I can also go to my scene manager and look at the different layers from Rhino, and I can actually go and drag these into these layers directly. I can also, let's say, when dragging materials in here, it will be applied on all of these objects that lies within this layer. I can also select individually. Let's say that I want to have this button something else. If I try to drag this into that one, it will apply that material to everything that has the same material as this one. So we will actually exchange the materials. So if I want this to have something totally unique, I need to right click and say unlink material. So that means that now this one has a unique material that looks the same as the others. And now I'm able to drag this red button in. So we can also use some smart keys. If we go for help, we have the hotkeys overview. And here we can see that we have, if we go for materials, along other good shortkeys, we have something called select material and apply selected material. So we can just try that quickly. Let's say I want to add a red button to something else, or this material. I can actually hold down my shift key and click left click. So now I have that material selected, and I can say shift and right click. And you will now see that then I'm applying this material to that individual object. So we can sort of differentiate those two, that sometimes we add materials or we change materials by dragging them into, let's see, into this objects that has that material, and sometimes we want to add materials to that specific object, and then we can do that in different ways. We can also say copy and shift right click, and then we sort of selected that material, and then we can put it in. So copy, and then I can apply this to only these two buttons. So if we go into our material tab, we can see the different materials that we have. We can't really see them just yet. Let's see. We should have some icons showing the different materials here, and then we can see which materials that are like unique materials and which materials that are linked to several objects. So let's go back. I will actually hide this one right now, so I will right click and say hide part. I can also click this eye on the geometry, and then we have the screen surface within. We can see what happens if we, so we have a small surface being there. We can use a material that I like that's called flat. That means that it will not be affected by light and shadow. It's just going to be whatever it is. So if I double click that one, I can see sort of the settings for that individual material, and it has a color tab. So to get starting with keyshot, we will look at this color tab. I will actually click the texture button on that one, and then go for the pictures, and let's say we can pick this image. So with that, we applied that texture into our sort of color settings. We have something called a bump that has to do with sort of the texture on the surface, if it's grainy or, yeah, so we can apply some different textures there. And we have the opacity, so it could be transparent in some places and not in other places. But let's continue with this color tab. So if we click move texture, we can actually see that we have this image being sort of repeated all over. So we can go ahead and increase the size on this one, and we can see how it updates. We can move it slightly down as well, so we'll make sure that we have covered the whole screen. I will then right click and say show all parts, and now we have this screen here in front. So I will go for glass. Let's see, solid glass, because we have some thickness on the geometry. We have both sort of an outside and an inside, so then we use the solid glass settings. There we go. Now we have this screen behind the glass, and the screen almost feels like it's emitting light because it's sort of used within that with the flat material. So let's go ahead to add some environments, because what we can see within these materials is only what it's reflecting and the light that it has around itself. I will also go and add the rubber material to these parts. So go for environment, and here we can see what kind of studio environments. We have some other environments as well, but I will go for the studio right now. So now it looks kind of flat and a little bit boring. If I would use this environment, now we will have some more sort of clear edges in our reflections and such. Let's play around a little bit. And of course, now we're looking at the environment itself. We have that as sort of the background. We can go into the settings for our environment, go for the settings tab here, and then we can change our background to be sort of just a single color. So I will pick something warm, a warm gray. And now when we still have sort of the same environment, making the lights and the reflections. So we can continue dragging different environments in, and we can see that it's changing, and it's changing how the object looks. If we have a nice view, but we feel that the light isn't where we want it, we can actually rotate the environment around our object to make sure that we have sort of the reflections that we want. We can also right click and holding down Control and left clicking to sort of drag the environment around, so change the rotation. We also have other settings as ground shadows. We can see that we have a small shadow on the ground. We can add ground reflections, and I think it's a nice way to just use the simple settings to begin with, to have this like automatic plane. And of course, within Rhino we can also create geometry for the ground to sort of have our object to behave as we want. Okay, let's go for a render. So I will click my render button, and here we can set the output resolution, so it's already set in a good resolution. I just also want to point out that we have some options. It might be set to JPEG. I would prefer the PNG, because then we can also include the alpha channel, which means that even though we see the background right now, if we include the alpha, it means that it will actually delete this and it will be all transparent. It will keep the shadow, and then you can apply this or sort of add this geometry or this image to whatever background color that you want at a later stage. So it's nice if you want to make a collage of several renders. Of course, be clear with where you sort of make this image as well. So now I will put this into my desktop folder. We don't need to worry about layers and passes, but there is a lot of ways to sort of single out different elements from our image. We have some settings when it comes to how many, sort of the quality of our image, and usually we don't need to go that high to begin with when making our images. When we're using more advanced materials as glass, ray bounces and samples will be sort of more important to keep track on. But you can keep it as something quite simple as this to begin with. We can have several images put in queues, but for now I will just press the render button. This will take a while, so I will pause in the meantime. Okay, the image is done, and I will just go ahead and close this window. I will look in my folder, and here I can see my image. I will just quickly drag it into Photoshop so you can see how it looks like. As described earlier, we have a transparent background, which means that the background color was deleted. We can select this image and paste it into another window, and here we can see that we have the ground sort of shadows being there on our object. So depending on the environment, you will have different types of sort of looks when it comes to the shadows. But for example, if we have several images, it's quite handy to being able to sort of put them together in this space. And of course we can always go in and sort of hide some of the this, like this surrounding. So I will go in and paint away some of this shadows in order to make it blend into our image in a nice way. So have fun and play around with the keyshots.